what I'm going to talk to you about today is a Miscellany of Merseyside mysteries. And I presume that you will recognise the geography of Merseyside. You've got Southport in the north, coming round to Liverpool in the middle is St Helens, and the Wirral, which is where I live, but they're never very happy on the Wirral about being in Merseyside. Most of them believe that they're still in Cheshire, but that's a completely different story that I'm not going to go into about local politics. Right, this is where I probably pressed the wrong button. Oh no. Okay. I've been collecting stories about phantom hitchhikers and road ghosts over the last few years, and I've had articles published in 14 Times. I've presented about them here at Weird North, and I've given presentations for charities. Now, what I've found is that whenever I do this sort of thing, I continually get approached by people who say, something happened to me. So, can I tell you the story? So, I end up actually being something of a collector of stories, whereby I then deal with the people, record their new testimonies, make sure that they're as full and consistent and proper as possible, and any new leads I then set off and try and get to the bottom of them. What I'm going to do today is, how many of you are here, hands up, how many of you were here in the original first Weird Weekend North in 2016? Quite a few veterans, but quite a lot of new people, which is good, because what I'm proposing to do is do a swift recap of the Old Man of Halsall Moss stories that I did at the very first Weird Weekend, because I've got quite a few new ones. I will then be adding in some of the stories that I've got from the article that I had in 14 Times, Strange Stories from Southport, and I'll also be including stories from an article that I've submitted that is yet to appear in print, amazingly called the Miscellany of Merseyside mysteries. I will also include a few stories about what happened to Merseysiders when they've been in other parts of the country. There are little green men in Southport. Now, do people here recognise him? The Megan, absolutely. Now, amazingly, he is, well, I won't say alive, but he's certainly there in Southport if you go to the Atkinson Centre, Atkinson Museum, because there is actually a permanent down there exhibition. And I went a couple of months ago because there was also an exhibition about the Frank Hampson, the artist the man who drew down there. Absolutely superb it was, but then you've got to be of a certain vintage to enjoy reading the Eagle and things like that, but it's absolutely fantastic. But if you want some real weirdness in Southport, you can just go to the British Boardroom. This map here is of the area that's called Halsall Moss. If you recognise it, you've got Formby here to the west, Ormskirk here to the east, and then up here, Birkdale, round about there is Southport. So, right in the middle, you've got the village of Halsall, and you've got Newcote Lane, Gregory's Lane, and what these are here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H, are the locations of phantom hitchhiker and road ghost sightings that were in my original article. As I said, there's a few new ones, but what I will do is go through them quickly and then concentrate on the newer cases. But the case H was there was a widow of a worker who got in touch with me. The worker had been killed in an accident. He'd been driving a steamroller, and unfortunately it had gone into a ditch and killed him. And she'd been approached by a researcher who then said that his death was portended by a a World War II airman who was wearing a flying jacket and helmet with a white scarf, and he appeared from an old-style car in that era, and whenever this happened, it was a portent of death. We never managed to track down the researcher, unfortunately, but she was very genuine, and this researcher sorted out. Although the people, the fellow workers that had been with her husband said that nothing really strange happened at the time, it was just a tragic accident. Case G was a strange fire in the middle of nowhere where people veered off and found themselves in a ditch, and when they got there, there was a very, very strange fire. Nobody around. Who actually lit it? Why? Where? Nobody for miles. And they had to walk home. Now, I'm going to talk about where it all started. Bill's story. I'm going back to the 1989-90, where if somebody had a birthday, you went out at lunchtime and had a drink from work. It's found on a bit these days, I think. And I've been reading the book The Vanishing Hitchhiker by Jan Brunland. And I said, this is a brilliant book, lots of things. I outlined the classic Phantom Hitchhiker story where somebody goes and driving along, it's normally a man, and sees normally a female at the side who thumbs a lift, and the man then says, "Fine, where do you want to go?" To Lancashire Avenue or wherever it is. Drive along, and just short of the venue, she's disappeared. And so he goes and knocks on the front door and says, "Excuse me, but I was driving along Hanger Lane or wherever it is, and I picked up this young girl," describes her, "and I was giving her a lift here, and she disappeared." At which the usually old couple say, "Oh, you picked up the ghost of our daughter who was killed there 20 years ago. You are the umpteenth person, the young man who was given a lift to her maid," or something along those lines. Anyway, the thing was that I was saying, these are good stories, aren't they? And they're friend of a friend, so normally it's just urban legends. But my colleague and friend Bill said, "Well, actually, that sort of thing happened to me." He was alone driving in his Mini, he's a big guy, across Halsall Moss towards Ormskirk one Friday night in early 1965. Halsall Moss is a very flat area, mainly farmland, between Southport and Ormskirk, and that statue there is there to commemorate the fact that it's where they cut the first sod on the Leeds-Liverpool canal all those years ago. It's that flat. The weather for Bill was clear, but pitch dark, and they were approaching the bridge over the disused railway. He looked in the car mirror and saw a large, elderly man sitting on the back seat, wearing a grey or a white scarf around his neck like a cravat. The impression was that he was wearing a flat cap. Bill was convinced that he was a real person, so he jabbed his foot on the clutch to make it look like there was a problem so that he could stop the car. He got out and armed himself with the crankshaft. He was that scared. But there was nobody there. He was certain there was no trick of the light or a hallucination, and he told the story to his mum when he got home. 6 or 7 years later, at a social event, he met a man who had virtually the same experience at exactly the same spot. They compared notes. It was an elderly man, similar appearance in the backseat, who had simply vanished. I persuaded Bill to give me the story and let me write it up, and as it were for the record, because if you don't write these things up, then it just goes into folklore. And it ended up being published in just a short piece in Fortune Times in the winter of 1990. I then went and I'd always thought, because it was coming up to 50 years after his experience, I always wondered if other people had had the same experience. So I did some research a few years ago and asked people via the local newspaper, The Champion, if they had similar experiences. I was rather surprised at the response. I thought it'd be great if I got one or two. I got about 8 in total. And this one is popping out for a pint. Now this is Scarisbrick Arms for anybody who recognises the area. And good people from Lapis converted, I think, the whole area into an old man of Halsall Moss pub crawl at one point. But we won't go into that, but I like the endeavour there. So there's a professional woman returning to Orton from visiting a sick friend in Formby, going along the B5195, which is a twisty road with right angles. It was dark, early evening, patchy mist, and she slowed at the sharp corner of Farmer Ted's. Not Father Ted's, Farmer Ted's. It is actually a farm. And she had the distinct impression that a man had got into the back seat of the car and sat directly behind her. This was impossible, she knew, but she sensed that if she looked in the mirror, then she would see him. She was actually terrified. She didn't dare look around, and although she's not religious, she kept saying the Lord's Prayer out loud over and over again for protection. She felt that the man was real, but eventually she felt as though he's not going to hurt, so she became a little bit less terrified. But when she slowed down at the Scarisbrick Arms, because of the junction, the man got out of the car. So there's an enormous sense of relief. And she reckoned that she glimpsed someone of mature age, not old, not young, but agile and strong, and wearing a leather skirt or an apron. What she said was there was no physical opening and closing of car doors when the man got in or got out. He just arrived and left. She felt it was like having given a hitchhiker a lift to the pub. But she didn't feel it was of this century. Maybe it was mist or speed activated an old memory, but you could not recall such an experience. Maybe she picked up a presence of a man from long ago, even Roman, she thought, judging by the leather apron. Next case E, is the man in the gabardine coat, and it's another professional lady, Mrs. H. And she had a couple of experiences driving along the A570 near Edge Hill University prior to the event that I'll describe. Twice she had seen a purple lilac wisp fluttering across the road at the same place, open fields either side. Her husband said, "Oh, you must have seen a ghost." Anyway, this one dark winter night in the 1990s, she was dropping down to Halsall from Cleves Hill, travelling along narrow lane, which I think we can infer was a fairly narrow lane. She stopped at a blind junction with Halsall Lane and bent forward to see if the road was clear. Over her shoulder, she saw that someone was in the back seat of the car. He was a large man, in his 60s, wearing a grey or a beige gabardine coat with a light yellow or beige scarf tied like a cravat. He seemed normal and peaceful, with no expression. Her reaction was, "I've got a ghost in the back of my car. If I can get home quickly, then I can show my husband." As you do. So she accelerated home, but the figure had gone. But she remembers the event vividly and all of the details. Sorry, that's too many controls here. Right, shadow across the windscreen. Mrs. W. of Ainsdale was travelling along Gregory's Lane from Ormskirk. It's 5:30 on an unpleasant November evening in 2013. So quite a few of the events are actually quite recent, you know. It was particularly windy, rainy and very dark, and the riding centre, which is close to the bridge that I mentioned a minute ago, was directly ahead of us. She described what happened as, when you sat stationary in traffic and a pedestrian crosses the road immediately behind your car, they cast a shadow right across your back windscreen. That was the sensation that I experienced. But at the time I was travelling at 40 miles an hour. So it was safe to say there was nobody walking behind the car. For a split second, the shadow encompassed the whole car and then it passed. She was unnerved, but she rationalised that it was shadows of the telegraph poles or tiredness or similar, and she forgot about it. But then, The same thing happened in September 2014 and October 2014. Both of the later events were around the same time of day and on the same stretch of road. She doesn't remember the weather on these occasions, which suggests that it was probably a fairly calm dusk. The fact that the experience does not happen every evening caused her to rule out shadow effects of telegraph poles, etc. None of the events are particularly scary, but she keeps an open mind. Now, Alan was a taxi driver in the late 1990s, and it was only one Sunday morning between 3 and 3:30 in June or July. He was driving west on Gregory's Lane from Halsall towards Birkdale. He was tired and had just passed the bad bend in the road, heading towards the bridge over the disused railway line. Suddenly, right in front of him, he saw an oldish guy wearing a cap and a farmer's type jacket. He slammed on the brakes, but the man was so near that Alan was certain that he'd run him over. He stopped the car, he got out, he was shaking like a leaf, but when he looked where the car had been, and under the car, there was nothing there. The man had simply disappeared. There was no evidence that he hit something else. The man in the wool-knitted coat. Mrs. B from Southport was returning home from work along the main A570 trunk road from Ormskirk. It was around 9:30 p.m, September, October 2004. It was winter and it was dark. She was approaching the Blue Elephant restaurant and she sensed someone was in the car with her. Just past the restaurant, approaching the bridge, over the Leeds Liverpool Canal, she turned her head and saw a man sitting in the front passenger seat next to her. He was wearing a man's woolen winter coat and a hat. She didn't see his face, but the bridge is on a bend, and so she naturally looked at the road to make sure she took the bend safely, but when she looked back, the man had gone. He wasn't frightening, but it was the next day that she realised just how strange it was. This is one of my favourites, White Van Man. The nursing sister was driving along the main trunk road, the 570, towards Scarisbrick from her sister's home in Southport, accompanied by her mother. She had to get to a shift that she got at St Helens, and so it was 10 to 6 on a light, fine summer's day in 2005. She had the driver's window down, and there was no other traffic on the road. Suddenly, from nowhere, a white van drove alongside. She clearly saw that the van was driven by a clean-shaven man, about 40 years old, who just smiled at them. The van appeared to overtake, but then it vanished into thin air. There was no sound from the van. Her mother was in complete shock. Who was that? Yet 2 minutes later, the same white van drove up alongside again, driven by exactly the same man, and then vanished completely. The area is flat, there are no turn-offs. They pulled over and had an attack of the EEG so that they could recover. Now, those are the stories that I told in 2016. I'm now going to move on to the new stories, which I don't think I've told here. The mother-in-law story. I shared my copy of the 14 Times article with a colleague of mine, John Moss, and she shared it with the family. And her mother-in-law told the following story. She was working at the TSB Bank in Ainsdale during the late 1970s. And a colleague came and described events that he'd had whilst driving home to Wigan. He believed that he'd actually run over somebody in his car. So he got out of the car to look for the victim, but he couldn't find anything. Which is very, very similar to Alan's story that I said a minute ago. But he was so convinced that he'd run someone over that he reported the incident to the police. Although the bank staff didn't know the complete detail of the incident, the mother-in-law recalls that recalls them all thinking that it was funny. Ha ha, funny ha ha, especially as he had told the police. But this last point is important because it acts as an illustration of why people who have strange experiences are very reluctant to volunteer their stories. The drunken farmer. Okay. It was between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in September 2010 or 11. There were two cars, four people in each, travelling from Southport to Gulf. And they came across an old man in the middle of the road. He was a bit drunk, and he looked a bit drunk anyway, and he was old, Victorian, farmer-type clothing and a hat. Looked quite dirty, and he was smoking a pipe. And both of the cars went round the man, but then they both stopped because they thought there was something amiss, and they turned round to check if he was okay. But there was nobody there. The fields either side of the road are flat, and there are clear views for miles. Nobody could explain how he could have disappeared in 20 seconds. On the return journey, it was late night, early morning, and they passed the same spot, and they saw police in a police car. So they stopped to ask what had happened. Someone had called them out, having seen a man in the road, a bit drunk. They'd stopped and gone back, but he'd disappeared. They rang the police to help look for him. They described the person as wearing farmer-type clothing. John's story. Okay, there's a few photos after this. It was around, this is a story going back to 1974, September, October. John was driving his E-Type Jaguar, which is a lovely car. It was going down Newcut Lane at about 65 miles an hour, which is what you would do in an E-Type Jag. It was 9:30 on a dark, wet night, and as he approached the bend, there, standing in the middle of the road, was a man, dressed a bit like an old farmer. John swerved to miss him, and the car took off and flew into the field, turning around. And the photos that I'll show you in a minute will give you some idea about how far he travelled. He landed about 50 feet or so from the road. The car should have folded upon landing, given that it's got a monocoque design. But when John checked, there was no one to be seen. John doesn't drink, and then an ambulance took him to Southport A&E. The next day he turned up and took a few photos, and he went to the nearby house, there's only one house nearby, and thanked them for calling the ambulance. And they said, we didn't ring the ambulance. And to this day, he has no idea how anybody called the ambulance for the ambulance to arrive to him. He had not raised the story that I've just told you until he saw that I was speaking at Queen's Court Hospice about it. Because he'd always been ridicule. So he'd actually kept the story to himself for about 50 years. So if you want, that's the main, I think you can see the main road is along there. That's quite a distance away. That's another, you can see the skid marks about how he went over the ground, and that's where the farm house nearby. And that's the view from behind the E-Type Jag to where the car is. So it was a long way. He's very, very lucky that he wasn't actually killed. Now, a recent story that I've got is of Mr. Wren, who's a 51-year-old specialist motorcycle courier who was heading south from Ormskirk towards Junction 1 on the M58. Junction 1 of the M58. It was a weekday night in September 2018, so we're talking about very recent, and it was 12:30, 1:45 in the morning. The weather was clear, but very cold. The temperature down to about 4 or 5 degrees centigrade. It was going down Lilac Lane, which is, this photo here is of of the junction that I'm going to be talking about. He went down Lilac Lane to a sharp left bend at the junction with Leyden Road, but he was keeping to about 20 to 30 miles per hour, and as you can see, it's open fields. Arriving at the bend, he saw a figure standing at the roadside to his left. He was very close, and he hadn't picked it up in his headlights because he was concentrating on the road. The figure was a solid silhouette of average height, but he couldn't tell the sex. He checked in his rearview mirror, but there was nobody there. He immediately thought, something is wrong here, but he couldn't stop. He was very disturbed by this, and as he said, after his shift, he just went and freaked out. He passes the bend very regularly, maybe twice a shift, and he's checked every time, but he's never had the same experience again, but he cannot explain it. Talking phantom hitchhiker. It's strange how you sometimes get stories. I was talking to this one gentleman, I won't give away the venue, because it would give the person away. But what are you talking about? I said, I'm talking about road ghosts and phantom hitchhikers. So she said, well, something like that happened to me. Completely out of the blue. And this is his story. One night in August, around about 1983, 27-year-old Mr. M left his home in Crosby to pick up his wife from work in Southport. He was driving alone in an Austin Allegro, shows how old he is, along the coastal road linking Ainsdale to Southport. This is a view of the coastal road, and it's very close to where the experience was had. It was about 11:30 at night, and it was raining heavily. He was naturally concentrating on his driving, and about 300 yards past the Pontins roundabout, his headlights hit a man thumbing to hitch a lift, standing right on the edge of the road to his left. He pulled over, wound down the passenger window, and said he could take the man to the centre of Southport. The man was wearing a Parker-type coat and was soaking wet and wasn't carrying any bags. The man had a stubble on his face and dark eyes, and Mr. M guessed that he was probably in his mid-30s. The man's behaviour was normal and calm, but looked like something was troubling him. Mr. M just put it down to the bad weather. He was quietly spoken with a local Southport accent. And he asked if he could bring his girlfriend with him into the car. So Mr. M agreed. Staying on the passenger side, the man stepped to its rear without making a sound, although the heavy rain was very noisy. Mr. M then realised that the man was nowhere to be seen, and so he opened the driver's window and saw that there was nobody there. He stepped out of the car for a couple of seconds and looked around, but still there was nobody there. So it took about 20 seconds or so for Mr. M to realise that the man had completely disappeared, and there was no sign of any girlfriend. The road at that point was edged with high sandhills, so there was nowhere that the man could have gone. The whole episode probably took about 2 minutes. He was completely befuddled, drove to Southport, and his wife and her friend said he looked like he was in shock. Spittle phantom hitchhiker. Now, there is a reputed phantom hitchhiker on Poole Road in Spittle, which is between Port Sunlight and Bromborough on the Wirral. A young female has been seen late at night, and on several occasions has entered the car before disappearing. The appearances peaked in the 70s and the 80s. This place here is about 200 yards from where I live. In fact, I go past that junction many times because my son, his wife and the grandchildren live about 200 yards the other side. And my oldest son heard about these phantom hitchhiker experiences while he was at school. But if you go down the road, there is a bridge, Dimmesdale Bridge in Bromborough, where is also a possible location for such things. Now, I was giving a charity presentation about road ghosts at Tranmere Road in aid of the local hospice there. So I thought, local people, they'll know about this sort of thing. Let's find out. Does anybody know? So I asked. And I was then approached by a married couple, both ex-police officers, just after I'd done the presentation. And they said there was definitely a story about a female phantom hitchhiker in Spittal. But it was on the bridge across the Bergenhead to Chester Railway at Spittal Station, which is about 1 mile from the location there. They were both told this when they started work at the local Bromley police station in the 1980s. But they'd never seen anything themselves and weren't aware of anyone that had had such an experience. Now, I thought, hang on a minute. I've lived in the area for 40 years and I've heard the tale on occasion, but I haven't found no one who has actually ever seen this phantom. And now I know there are 3 different locations, each about a mile from the next. It looks like every new officer at Bromley police station was told this story, meaning that it would then be widely disseminated because it's a good story. And this was just about the time that Jan Harold Runvan's classic Vanishing Hitchhiker was published, around in 1981. And so the popularity of the book would help further disseminate the very urban legends that it describes. So my personal guess is that someone at Bromley police station either read the book or picked up on his classic Phantom Hitchhiker story and attached it to a nearby location to wind up new police officers. I might be wrong, but I stand to be corrected. Okay. Rob Bray. I'm presuming that Rob's not here. I did mention he lives in Northamptonshire, although he's a local Southport lad. And there's an article that he had in Fortune Times, It Happened to Me, which I had it forwarded by the gang of Fort, and I liaised with Rob on writing of his stories. And he had some very strange experiences. In September 2018, he liked to go for walks over the Birkdale dunes there, and he found that they changed the boundary fences, and so he was walking along his usual path, and then the usual path didn't go where it usually went, and he ended up in impenetrable scrub. He tried all which ways, and he was getting very worried. As he said, he was close to panic. He couldn't find a way out. It was completely different. He felt as though the actual area was playing games with him. But then he found that he was going along a road, a path that he'd already tried several times. But this time, it all opened out, and he managed to find his way back easily. So he reckons that he was a bit pixie-led, as the fairy tale story goes, around the dunes. But then in 1991, he was with a mate of his in his car, and he'd gone and parked off the road behind the Royal Birkdale Golf Club, about 300 yards from the road, for a crafty ciggy, as youngsters did in those days. And when he found that somebody or something was actually getting hold of the rear of the car under the wheel arch, and rhythmically and violently, unseen hands were rocking the car very badly. At which point his mate said, "Just get out of here." So he accelerated away. He can't explain what it was, but they were very, very scared. And his final tale was that he was on back in about 1992, Hornby Sandhills, and there was a perfect circle of large dog prints with no entrance or exit points. But Hornby is very famous for its own black dog of old trash, so maybe it was old trash, who knows? Good Reverend Hayes. In the 1970s, St Thomas's Church in Melling, as in the picture, had a vicar called Reverend Hayes. It was probably in his 80s. He was readily recognised by his hat and his cassocks. And he was having problems with the church's petrol mower, and so Mr P was asked to check it over and repair it. Unfortunately, Mr P was a bit lax in doing this and was then admitted to hospital. But upon discharge, Mr P was walking up the 700-yard footpath between Rock Lane and Waddicker Lane, which is known locally as the Pads, towards St Thomas's. He had a clear view ahead of him, and there he saw Reverend Hayes walking towards him, wearing his distinctive attire. Mr P was a bit embarrassed because he hadn't sorted out the mower. So, as you do, he dipped his head down, pretending not to have seen the Reverend. But then when he looked up, the Reverend was nowhere to be seen. There were no turn-offs for him to have left the path. He thought this was a bit strange. He was completely flummoxed. But he was even more confused when he got home and was told that the Reverend had actually died 3 weeks previously while Mr P was in hospital. Mrs J of Southport is a very sprightly 70-year-old and regularly travels by bus between Liverpool and Southport. In late spring 2010, she was on her way home upstairs on a double-decker not long before 4:30 in the afternoon. The weather was good and the bus was on the long stretch of road of the A565 through Ince Woods, passing the gatehouse and what is now a care home. Looking through the upstairs window of the gatehouse, she clearly saw the white figure of an old woman sat at a spinning wheel or a loom. The bus was travelling about 35 miles an hour, but she was certain of what she saw. She saw the same vision again while passing on the bus a few weeks later. In fact, she'd seen the apparition about 4 times in total. She accepts that prior to the first sighting, she'd heard school children on the bus asking each other if they'd seen the ghost. And this probably encouraged her to look into the gatehouse. She dismisses the possibility of suggestion, though, or an optical illusion, because she has frequently passed the gatehouse around the same time, and an optical illusion would almost certainly be regularly repeated. This was not the case, and she recalls the clarity of the image of the old woman, who she says wore a white hat and a white pinafore covering her chest. The haunted radio station. Last year, I was interviewed by Howard Hughes on his talk radio programme, The Unexplained, which is very good. We're talking about phantom hitchhikers and road ghosts, primarily on Halsall Moss. To my surprise and delight, he said he actually grew up in Formby and always found the moss quite disconcerting, particularly at night. As an aside, he mentioned that he'd worked for Radio City, which is in St John's Beacon, up there in the middle of Liverpool. One night he was going around the station when he saw before him what looked like a caretaker in a 1960s style cloth coat and cap with heavy-duty black boots. He saw him very clearly and took in his appearance, but then the caretaker just simply vanished right in front of him. Naturally he was disturbed and he went to find his colleague, who on looking at Howard's face said, "So you've seen him then?" Apparently the phantom has been seen by many people, and the general theory was that it was the ghost of an old unnamed worker who checks on the building. Never any feeling of malevolence. Howard suspects everyone at Radio City knows of the ghost in the town, but are reluctant to speak about it. St George's Dock Building. Now, that, like neo-Egyptian building, is fascinating. Do you know what it is? Well, for those who aren't from Merseyside, it's actually a ventilation shaft for the Mersey Tunnel. The one on the Wirral side looks real rubbish, but on the Liverpool side, it looks good. When I was doing research into phantom hitchhikers on motorbikes in the Mersey tunnels, I contacted Mersey Travel, and they put me in touch with a guy called Peter Bishop, who was really helpful. He'd worked there in engineering for over 30 years, and he gave me, besides stories which I presented to him before about motorcycle hitchhikers in the Mersey tunnels, he gave me what he considered to be a genuine ghost story. In the basement of the George's Dock building is an area nicknamed the Bedroom Passage, which is where, during World War II, air raid precaution wardens, ARP, would sleep in between their round-the-clock shifts. Standing 190 feet tall, it is one of the highest buildings in Liverpool at that time, and strategically placed near the docks. So ARP wardens would climb to the top and watch for incoming German bombers. Today there's no trace of its former use. It simply hosts enclosures with computer equipment, workspace and passageways. Two of Peter's most trusted Mersey tunnel staff, a tunnel control engineer and an inspector of works, each independently encountered an ARP warden in that area. They were about 3 years apart, and in essence their stories were the same. Each had been walking down the corridor in the late evening when a man came towards them. The inspector of works thought it was just one of the maintenance staff. He then noticed the man was wearing a greatcoat and carrying a metal helmet with binoculars and a torch. As they passed in the passage, the man said, "All's quiet tonight. Jerry stayed home." It was only at this point that the strangeness of the situation struck home, and each witness turned to see the phantom disappear. Each witness turned to see the phantom disappear through the next airlock door. What is clear is that the phantom actually spoke to the two witnesses, or they both imagined that they heard someone speak. Both witnesses are down-to-earth characters, neither given to romancing or believing in ghosts. Peter Bishop had known them for many, many years and provided their names. He vouched for their honesty and their believing that they had genuine, inexplicable experiences. Ainsdale Beach, a local correspondent told me the following. "The only strange experience I've ever had was on Ainsdale Beach many years ago." There's a few people who've had strange experiences on Ainsdale Beach, but we won't go into that. He was walking along the beach and asked an elderly man in working clothes, boots and flat cap for the time as his watch had stopped. The man just looked at him with a blank expression and carried on. He walked 10 paces and turned around to look, and the beach was deserted. It's often puzzled him as there was no way the man could have climbed the sandhills in that time, because they were a good 100 yards or so from them. Footsteps at midnight. Now I know this is true because the person who told me is here and told me to. It was around midnight one summer night in the early 1980s when Mr. A was driving his girlfriend home in his Mini Clubman. She was concerned about her father's health, and so they stopped the car to talk things through. They parked under a street lamp in Oxford Road, Birkdale, outside the Royal National Institute, the Blind Home for Blind Children, which is that building on the screen. The near side door was adjacent to the curb. As they sat and talked, Mr. A became aware of heavy footsteps slowly approaching, as if someone wearing leather-soled and heeled shoes was walking on the flagged pavement. The street lamp provided enough light to allow the couple to see each other, and the car windows enabled a clear view around the car. As they continued to chat, Mr. A glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see perhaps a dog walker along the road, but there was nobody there. But the footsteps continued. So Mr. A checked his rearview mirror and looked again over his shoulder. As the footsteps finally reached the car, passing right beside them and beyond the bonnet, he got out of the driver's door and, standing with it ajar, looked around. This was in part to check that there was no echo effect involved, but again there was nobody to be seen. But his girlfriend had become concerned. Normally very calm and matter of fact, she shouted at Mr. A to get her home immediately, which is what he did. Some 35 years later, Mr. A contacted his now ex-girlfriend and asked for her recollections of the night, and they were exactly the same as his, and as I just described to you. What happened? Mr. A is certain that there was no misperception or unusual sound effect. He's very familiar with the acoustics and ran his own company in this very field. He is definite that something passed the mini clubman that night that made sounds like footsteps but which could not be seen. Right, this is a ponder for you. There is a headstone in the graveyard in St. Bridget's Church in West Kirby on the Wirral. And you can't necessarily see it, but it's got one word written on it: breath. Now, is this a name, or is this an instruction? What happens if you do go and press it? Anybody like George Romero's Zombies? Well, I did go and press it and nothing happened. No, I did get in touch with the vicar, and he assured me that as far as he knew from the records that, yes, somebody presumably called Press or whatever is buried under there. It's a genuine headstone, but there's no dates or anything on it. So it's just very, very strange. I hope you are impressed by that. Sorry. Handsome Concorde. Okay. Mid-late August 1975, in Lancashire, that's the pseudonym, was 15 years of age. On a weekend trip to Shropshire with his mum and dad, he stayed at a campsite in either Arley or Hampton Low, which is south of Bridge North. He was particularly interested in seeing a locomotive at the Bewdley station that weekend on the Severn Valley Railway. Their steam train had got delayed at Hampton Low station, and everyone disembarked onto the sunny platform to wait, including apparently a carriage full of nuns. A Spitfire aircraft flew over, and someone remarked that there must be an air show nearby. Later that fine Sunday afternoon, they left for their home on Merseyside. They were perhaps 50 to 20 minutes into the journey, which would place them probably north of Bridge North on the A442, which was the most direct route. Out in the countryside, suddenly, to their left, behind at first a low hedge, they saw the quite unmistakable shape of Concorde. What was ridiculous and remarkable was that its height, speed and angle made it appear that it had only just taken off. It was only about 10 to 15 feet off the ground. Len recalls that the undercarriage was still deployed, but accepts that his memory might be filling the gaps. But all three of the family commented that it was just an ordinary farmer's field that it was seemingly taking off from. The Concorde was parallel to them, also heading north and about 100 yards away. Len can't remember if there was any noise, which would be expected if you were that close, but he accepts that this might just be his memory. The airplane disappeared from view behind the hedges and trees as they continued up the road and was then nowhere to be seen. Now, Len knew that they were not near any airfield and had tried to rationalise this event over the years. Maybe it was an air show. The nearest major air show is at Cosford. And I made direct inquiries with them, that there was no show in 1975, and Concorde only featured in shows in 1986 and 87. Maybe it was taking off from an airstrip that was in the Severn Valley beyond the field. But the runway required would also have to be capable of handling a Boeing 747 jumbo jet. No such airstrip exists. So maybe it was experiencing trouble and was so flying very low, but surely this would have made the national press if that was the case, it was a near miss. Maybe it was something else altogether, but Len has no doubt it was unmistakably a Concorde. Therefore, this episode must be filed as both strange and unsolved. The Bride on the Bridge. Now, Miss W, who gave me the Farmer in the Road story earlier, was in a car being driven back from Alton Town late one summer evening around 9 o'clock on the 13th or the 14th of August in probably 2008. There were two cars, a boy and a girl in each, with Miss W, a passenger in the front car. Her friend Chris took the back roads rather than the main trunk roads to avoid major roadblocks. The weather was clear, with maybe a bit of drizzle in the air. After about 20 or 30 minutes, they were on a narrow two-way road approaching a waist-high bridge with brick walls either side, and little more than a single car's width over a canal or a small river. They then saw a lady in a wedding dress standing on the right-hand side of the bridge. As they drove carefully past her, the lady fell over the bridge. Miss W said to Chris that he must have hit her, but Chris insisted that he hadn't. They stopped, they got out and looked over the bridge down what appeared to be a 12 to 15 foot drop. There was nothing to see, no sign of the lady or anything. They called out but got no response. It was just silence. Their friends were right behind them, but they hadn't seen exactly what had happened, but they stopped to help. They could not call the police or ambulance because no mobile signal. They agreed that Miss W and Chris should drive on to find a telephone or get a signal while the friends stayed by the bridge. After about 3 minutes, they came to an isolated public house, maybe big enough to accommodate 50 people or so. The car park was not large, with most of the cars parked on the road. There were some houses nearby. They asked for a telephone and described how the lady had been on the bridge and had then fallen over the wall. They were greeted by a deathly silence. Now, this wasn't the slaughtered lamb. The landlady explained that they had seen the ghost of Sarah, who had fallen off the bridge and drowned on her wedding day 25 years previously, wearing her wedding dress. The phantom had been witnessed every year on the anniversary. Miss W and Chris were naturally shocked, but accepted her word and so did not call the police or ambulance. They returned to their friends before setting off on the remainder of their journey to Merseyside. Now, this is a very intriguing story and it's got potentially folkloric elements, as you will recognise. Now, unfortunately, Miss W cannot remember sufficient detail to enable identification of the bridge and the pub, e.g., were they driving on roads leading north or south of Stoke-on-Trent. What she explained to me when I tried to press her was that when she got in the car, she just liked to look out the window. She didn't concentrate on the route or anything like that. Now, I contacted Alan Murdy at the Ghost Club, but he didn't know anything about it. And I also contacted Mike Waters, regular area work, who with his local contacts and the very good mysteries group, as I went to visit a few weeks ago, they looked into it and they had no joy either. They tried all ends up and we had a discussion about this, and there's some outstanding questions, but they couldn't track it down. I did call a piece in the local paper to see if anybody would respond, but that again brought no information. Even from the papers themselves, a Sarah falling off a bridge on her wedding day, surely that would have been in the local press, if not the national press. So maybe there's a possibility of mist generated by the water course, which then evaporated. As sometimes when you from a distance, mist can appear solid. As you get nearer, then it just evaporates. And if you're travelling in a westerly direction around sunset, then maybe the light from the setting sun and the mist can play tricks with whatever is near the bridge, such as trees or bushes. The friends then maybe rationalise the disappearance of optical phenomena as the bride falling over the bridge. But what about the reaction and response from the people in the pub? I believe there are three possibilities. They were telling the truth. As I say, why wasn't the story of Sarah's demise known in the local or the national press? Or they were familiar with a local atmospheric or weather phenomenon relating to the bridge, which had developed into a ghost story that they liked to tell passing travellers. Or they were having a laugh. Now, the landlady wouldn't have to ask, "Are you local?" to two panicking Merseyside kids who arrived with an apparent outlandish tale. Why not humour them with a story made up on the spot? None of the regulars are going to contradict her, are they? That is pure speculation on my part, but I can say that Miss W and her friends sincerely believe that they had their experience, which was reinforced by their subsequent actions to seek help. Right, my last story, and one of my favourites. A mother and son were travelling from Southport to Tarleton on the A565 at 7 o'clock on a winter's evening in late 2015. So again, it's a fairly recent story. They passed the Banks roundabout. Banks is a village just north of Southport, where we don't necessarily familiar with it. Past the Banks roundabout, there's a straight stretch of dual carriageway to the Riverside Caravan Park, and the road is flat and there's open fields either side. To their left, they saw an arc of clear white light from the crescent moon down towards them, touching the ground in the fields. Through the hedge in the middle of the carriageway, they saw headlights of the oncoming cars doing the same arcing. The street lights on either side of the dual carriageway were doing exactly the same. In all the cases, there was a strong, sharp border to the light. Everything else that they saw, such as houses, looked normal. They then overtook a dark car with two ladies in it. One had short silver hair and looked around 60 years old. It only took seconds, but when she looked in the driver's mirror and the wing mirror, there was no car behind them. The car with the two ladies had simply disappeared. There were no cars behind them, with the nearest in front way ahead. There was nowhere to turn off. They then realised that the moon was now to the right, and all the arcs of light had gone, while the whole experience had taken possibly no more than a minute. On the return journey at about 10 p.m, they then realised that the street lights of the road were down the middle of the dual carriageway and not on the outside as they'd previously seen. They also realised that their first sight of the moon, to their left as they're driving east, was in an impossible position because it would have placed it to the north. I put this down as being weird with a capital W. So my conclusion is maybe Merseyside should be renamed Mystery Side. Thank you.